Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Qualified Opinions, the CPA Club Report. I'm Chris Vanover. This image on the screen was one of those where were you moments. We all remember where we were when we first saw footage coming in of this emergency landing of this US Airways flight way back in 2009. You might remember that a flock of Canadian geese flew directly into both engines and forced Captain Sully Sullenberger to ditch the plane in the Hudson River, where luckily all the passengers and crew survived. So that was way back in 2009, and it was dubbed the Miracle on the Hudson. Fast forward 15 years later, and who could forget this image from earlier this year when the door of an Alaska Airlines aircraft actually fell off during the flight. And yet again, thanks to the heroic efforts of the flight crew, everyone thankfully survived. So these airline incidences got me thinking. And recently, one of our colleagues here at CPA Club traveled to one of our member CPA firms up in Northern California, but little did he anticipate what was going to unfold. So what began as a routine flight up to Northern California from Southern California actually turned into hours of delays, frustrated passengers, and ultimately a canceled flight. But here's what's interesting. The reason for that canceled flight? Well, they chalked it up to crew fatigue. You see, in the airline industry, we all know that safety is paramount, right? There are regulations and protocols in place to ensure that every single aspect of air travel is monitored and regulated because they want to ensure and safeguard the passengers and the crew. Crew fatigue is actually recognized as a significant risk factor, and it's taken extremely seriously. There's mandated rest periods and stringent guidelines aimed at preventing fatigue-related incidences. So you might be wondering, why am I talking about all this? Well, let's find out. So this time of year, there's probably a lot of you out there that are auditors actually overseeing an audit. In other words, you're the one flying the plane, or you actually might be a client sitting in one of the passenger seats waiting for your audit to land. In other words, for the audit report to be delivered to you. Now, we've all heard that chime that comes on, and then the pilot comes over the loudspeaker and says, folks, we've encountered some unanticipated bumps. We'd like everyone to return to their seat and fasten their seatbelts. We all take notice of this, we strap in, and hopefully we get through the bumps without any further incident. But how many of us on an airplane, or maybe even your audit, might actually be flying with what could end up being a hole in the plane? You see, in our profession, we actually encounter a number of common challenges, such as compressed deadlines, staff turnover, client unresponsiveness, new accounting rules, maybe new auditing standards, and even surprise transactions, and sometimes even more stuff. And it typically unfolds during our busiest seasons, like right now. Now, these challenges are significantly disruptive to the planned course of the audit. And with every single passing billable hour, the path to the deadline or the landing actually becomes increasingly more difficult to navigate. Yet, despite these headwinds and these bumps and the mounting pressure, engagement leaders are often pushing their teams to meet the deadlines, prioritizing completion over the actual quality of the audit itself. And that's a problem. You see, it's that response to these bumps and the challenges that lead and contribute to the excessive workloads. We end up with more work, the deadline stays the same, the staffing stays the same, and it all leads to one thing: more overtime and more auditor fatigue. We've all seen it. The work weeks often extend well beyond the standard 55 hours during busy season. The weekend work becomes just a necessary evil to get the stuff done. And those realities are actually supported by data publicly disclosed by a number of firms. Take, for an example, PwC. Audit associates log an average of 220 hours of overtime annually, while senior associates work 256 hours of overtime. Audit partners and managing directors actually endure a staggering 349 hours of annual overtime. And surprisingly, one regional firm has even disclosed 816 hours of annual overtime for its staff. Now, I talked previously on a previous episode about the PCAOB sanction of Witham. Well, the Witham sanction is actually a carbon copy of the one that was levied on Markham back in June of 2023. And in that disciplinary order, there was alarming partner utilization rates, figures as high as 146%. One partner was actually found overseeing 75 issuer clients, and an engagement quality reviewer had to review the work of 118 issuer clients. Same stuff came out of the Witham report that I talked about previously. One engagement partner had monthly utilization of 220% and was even working almost 100 hours per week for 2 consecutive weeks. So why does this happen? Well, it's that pursuit of profitability that is often driving these firms to maximize the audit opportunities with minimal staffing levels. And so they're prioritizing financial gain over adherence to the actual principles and guidelines within our own AICPA professional code of conduct and the quality control practice aids. And that, again, is a dramatic problem that needs to get fixed. So what happens if we don't fix this? Well, this is probably the point in the flight where, unfortunately, somebody has to get on the loudspeaker and echo those words that Captain Sully did, brace for impact. Because just as tired pilots and crew actually pose risks to flight safety, auditors that are overworked and fatigued from their excessive workloads are actually compromising the quality and reliability of their audits, and they're potentially jeopardizing clients, stakeholders, and billions of dollars. Now, we've seen over the past year a number of documented incidences of how we as a profession are struggling when it comes to audit quality. In January, the PCAOB released a spotlight on insights from its interim inspection program of broker-dealer audits, and the number that jumps out on the page there, 60% of those audits exhibited deficiencies. Similarly, the PCAOB has said for the non-broker-dealer audits, in other words, the issuer audits of public companies that are going on, they would expect 40% of those that they inspect to actually have some sort of Part 1A deficiency. Lastly, but not least, the Department of Labor issued its own report back in November of 2023, where they emphasized the need to improve the audits of employee benefit plan audits because they were seeing major deficiencies in 30% of the audits that they examined. So these statistics are actually painting not the greatest picture of the challenges our profession faces. Now, from our experience supporting dozens of CPA firms with PCAOB and AICPA matters, we often find that the real reasons behind the deficiencies are not publicly aired. Firms are likely hesitant to acknowledge the impact of workload constraints on audit quality, and they usually opt for alternative explanations. But I do believe it's time for our profession to confront this reality head on and start to prioritize solutions that address one of the most likely root causes of poor audit quality, and it's simply excessive workloads. So as I think back on my colleagues' flight delay that they chalked up to crew fatigue, it really is a reminder of how important it is to prioritize the well-being of the auditors in our profession. We can only speculate about what might have happened, what disaster could have occurred had that flight actually went on as scheduled and no one really cared about crew fatigue. Reasonable passengers, you guys wouldn't board a flight if you knew your pilot and crew hadn't slept and were exhausted. In a similar way, clients and stakeholders of our audits should really be demanding the utmost quality in those audits to protect their interests and their investments. But all these recent inspections and deficiencies are really casting doubt on whether those expectations are really being met. We really need to take a stand here and start to address the toxic culture that's prevalent in public accounting, where excessive workloads are just normalized and employees are expected to prioritize work above all else. It's really time for us to wake up. So whether you're a CPA firm or you're a client, before you strap in for that bumpy audit ride, maybe your pre-audit checklist could actually include some questions like this. How does the firm prioritize the health and well-being of its audit team members, especially during busy season? What measures do they have in place to mitigate auditor fatigue and ensure that the audits are executed with quality? How transparent is the firm in reporting things like partner workload, manager workload, staff workload, or other audit quality metrics? And what steps are they even taking to address deficiencies that have been highlighted by the regulatory bodies such as the PCAOB and the US Department of Labor? Lastly, and probably most importantly, what are the firms doing to really enhance the culture within their firms? Those are my 2 cents, and this is Qualified Opinions.